Less than a decade after Expo 67, Montreal was yet again ready to open its doors to the world, this time for the Olympic Games. It goes without saying that much infrastructure, including a stadium, was required to host such an important event, and hence, the construction of one of the most iconic buildings in Montreal, the Olympic Stadium, was launched. Since it would be the image the city projected to the entire planet, it had to be eye-catching and innovative. The French architect, Roger Taillibert, was hired for the job, and problems arose very soon, heavily affecting choices in the final design of the stadium. Its construction was rushed, and problems ensued for years on after it was used for the Games. In a way, it's still an incomplete project, today subject to countless maintenance and renovation measures. That said, the Olympic Stadium was and remains unique in many ways. While it is not the only novel vision of modernism at the time, its organic architecture goes against the trending international style. Its towers intentionally slanted, its roof ostensibly removable, its construction techniques novel, and its overall image very modern. It was, and still is arguably, the most innovative building in Montreal. Much activity was taking place in Montreal by the end of the 1960s. Whether it was a successful exhibition or a series of terrorist attacks, the city was seemingly getting no rest, and that was not subject to change in 1970 when, during the 69th International Olympic Committee meeting, the city was awarded the rights to the 1976 Olympic Games. The tremendous significance of the event for both Montreal and Canada, as it was for the first time that the country was hosting the world's most important sports competition, called for substantive measures. Organizing such an event was no easy task, notably when it came to the construction of the demanded buildings. Jean Drapeau, the mayor of Montreal at the time, had a vision for the main building of the 29th edition of the Summer Olympic Games. His goal was to build a stadium where multiple sports competitions could be held on the same site, thus greatly reducing the movement of the participants from one space to another. Like many other cities have done for major sporting events, the stadium was placed in a rather poor sector of the city with a goal to promote further development within the area, which later on became home to a sports complex and to the Biodome. The only significant element around the stadium was the metro station P9, which opened in time for the Olympics. Being the main access point to all Olympic installations, it was designed by Marcel Raby to be consistent with the stadium. Its forthcoming walls in earth tones and rigid concrete give an impression of calm power intended to soothe the excitement of a spectator heading towards the stadium. It also had very wide passenger access and secondary connections directly to the Engrillon platform near the tunnel of the stadium, to avoid any traffic in the station. Plus, Olympics-themed artwork is very present in P9. On the exterior, the curved form of the eastern entrance is integrated into the stadium's esplanade and repeats the curvature of the monument. Being the author of the Parc des Princes de Paris and the Center of Préparation Pré-Olympique de Font-Romeu, Roger Taillibert highly impressed the committee who was in charge of the selection and was hired for the job of designing the Montreal Olympic Stadium. Born in 1926, he is an École de Beaux-Arts graduate who had continued his apprenticeship at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, where he was introduced to the more constructive approach. His first notable project was to develop a pool in Paris that posed some formally challenging structural difficulties, particularly in its roof design, which he patented and eventually attempted to replicate, to some extent, on the Olympic Stadium. It is that exploit that earned him his diploma from the École des Beaux-Arts and launched his career.
There are always critics. Only those who do nothing have no critics.
Taillibert was a very eccentric figure, and he was not ashamed of expressing his disagreement and anger against the involvement of the politicians in the construction process in Quebec. Of course, his dynamic temper earned him a rough reputation at the time. He was often criticized of being disrespectful towards Quebec and being oblivious to the local construction techniques. His views were radical, which certainly played in favor of the innovative aspect of the stadium. His philosophy is that sport is directly linked to the performance, which imposes the application of novel architecture shapes and the use of singular material. He favors organic shapes like curves over straight lines. That said, his architecture can derive from very complex mathematics as well as very lyrical forms, often inspired by marine biology. Furthermore, he claims that genuine modernism does not exist, that people are still reusing old Roman styles.
Because it is the most expensive structure of its kind on Earth, 10 times the cost of the Houston Astrodome. And even though they're working day and night now, it might not be finished on time. The creator of this...
The stadium broke ground on April 28, 1973, and was opened on the 17th of July, 1976 for the Olympic Games. However, it was not until 1987 that the tower and roof were finally complete. It was built from about 12,000 prefabricated components. As it stands, its tower is 20 stories tall, or 175 meters high, and the view from the top floor is breathtaking. It offers great panoramas of places including, but are not limited to, the Laurentians and Montreal's downtown. The idea of an intentionally slanted tower was very innovative. Compared to other skyscrapers in the world, the Olympic Stadium can be seen as rather short, and yet it still holds the record for the tallest inclined tower of the world today, which goes to say that its originality stands, up to now. To access the top of such a tall tower, an elevator is required. Anyhow, as it is slanted, a funicular is installed on its back instead. The stadium contains 56,000 seats and has received 67 million visitors since. After the Olympics, it became the home to the Montreal Expos, arguably one of the best baseball teams of all time, as well as some Canadian football teams. Nevertheless, ever since the Expos were relocated to Washington in 2004, it has no main tenant. Owned by the government of Quebec, it serves as a large venue on many occasions, namely for concerts and sporting events. Another illustration of the Olympic Stadium's unique personality is that it looks like a giant hand with curved fingers. The 34 cantilever panels, to which 4 shortened panels were added at the base of the tower, establish a flowing geometry for the structure. The stadium's elliptical shape was deliberately made to resemble a seashell, and its contour earned it the name the Big O. The stadium uses a subset of modern architecture called organic modern style, an architecture pioneered by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was one of the many variations of the time trying to differ from, nay, be the antithesis of the international style. The idea behind Wright's take on modernism is to unfold the architecture as if it was a living organism, from the seed within. In the case of the stadium, the design of the building derives from its environment, as if it grows out of the site. The organic modern style also represents the harmony between man-made structures and natural landscapes. Lines and rigid geometry shapes are replaced with more organic shapes such as curves and waves. Although the stadium might seem slightly reminiscent of that philosophy, it isn't, by any means, analogous to Wright's projects, and that can be explained by the fact that Taillibert also drew inspiration from Le Corbusier's late projects, directing his architecture towards concrete for its plastic and structural advantages. The stadium also set itself apart from the organic style, in that it does share a few key elements with the international style. For instance, there is a focus on the usability of the building. The shape of the building is designed for maximum visibility, so large arches are used to avoid columns and other visual obstructions. That was made possible by the new forms of concrete and cantilever trusses, as they can be used to build arches without any columns. That blend of style is, once more, a representation of the stadium's novelty. Taillibert's visual, poetic, and organic architectural shapes were constructed using very unconventional building methods. The perfect example to illustrate that statement would be the Velodrome, now known as the Biodome. It was one of the single most innovative pieces of architecture at that time. The shell of its self-supporting roof darts out from a single bearing point, dividing into 3 covers that rest on 3 additional bearing points. The 3 covers of that roof are joined together by two triangular-shaped sections, creating an exceptional vista from above. Additionally, Roger Taillibert succeeded in innovating construction techniques while building the stadium. It was the first time an integrated approach for pre-stressing and post-tensioning concrete had ever been used. He also resorted to the use of structural textile, which had never been done before in such a context. Regarding Mayor Jean Drapeau's vision of a condensed multi-purpose stadium where all the Olympic events would take place, everything had to be linked. For one, the Olympic Stadium is located under the tower rather than being separated from the stadium. Furthermore, for the first time ever in the world, the cycling events that usually happen outdoors took place under a roof in the velodrome, situated at the base of the tower. Because of the Olympic Committee's restrictions, the competitive events had to take place in an open-air stadium. That led to one of the most expensive decisions taken in the whole process, the inception of a removable roof above the stadium. It appears that the prodigious innovation comes a very spicy price tag. In this regard, the cost of the Olympic Stadium was much higher than the architect's initial estimate. A year before the Olympic Games, the cost of the building exploded from $486 million to $612 million. The velodrome, on the other hand, was supposed to cost $57 million and ended up costing a total of $75 million. In the same year, the construction workers went on strike, partially due to the requirement to use new construction methods that they were not familiar with. It delayed the construction of the stadium significantly. Out of the 34 arches, only one was placed in time. 1,300 workers worked day and night, but the stadium was not fully ready for the Olympics. The roof and tower wouldn't be complete until 11 years later. Another problem French engineers encountered during the construction of the stadium was that the base of the tower lacked 30% of the intended concrete. If the tower was completed, its base would have split and destroyed the stadium. As a result, they finished the tower in concrete reinforced by steel rods, lighter materials, rather than entirely building it out of concrete, as it was originally planned. After the Olympic Games ended, the government was questioning whether sticking with Taillibert's original plan was the right decision. The Quebec Liberal Party opted for a fixed roof which would cost no more than $15 million. On the other hand, Minister Charon from the PQ wanted to finish the stadium like the architect had intended it. In other words, to finish the tower and build a retractable roof. As the parties took turns coming into power, the plans were constantly changed over the years, which sparked a lot of attention in the media as taxpayer money was seemingly being burnt. The roof was one of the first in the world designed to be retractable, but it was subject to frequent tearing and cost $700,000 annually to fix. It was not adapted to the cold Canadian winters. Consequently, in 1998, it was replaced with a fixed fiberglass roof. The total cost of the building was just below $1 billion. The roof alone cost $150 million. The project is widely considered as a waste of money to most Quebecers. Modernism comes with a cost, and while some of these problems could have been avoided, it was all very well worth it at the end. Today, in Montreal's horizon, stands an inclined thumb leaning over a seashell, and that would be the city's most innovative building.